Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to BMA's webinar on improving quality in payables and receivables. My name is Nick Katko, President and owner of BMA, and for the next hour, I hope that I can share with you some practical methods to identify quality issues in payables and receivables and how to fix and improve those processes. Before we get started, I'd like to do a few administrative items. First of all, if you would like to get a copy of my presentation, you can go to the handout section of your control panel and you should see a copy of the PowerPoint there, which you can download it. If you cannot listen to this live, a recording is being made of this webinar, which will allow you to listen to it at any time. If you are listening to it live, you will be able to re-listen to it through the recording, and tomorrow you will be getting an email with a link to the recording. I will take questions at the end of this session. If you have a question, please type your question in the question panel on your control panel, and then I'll get to as many questions as possible at the end. And most importantly right now, and somewhat please feel free to respond, can you see me? Can you hear me? And can you see my screen? If it's yes to all of those, just please in the question, just type yes, everything's working. And so I'll just wait to, okay, that's great. I heard that, so now we will get going. So there's 3 learning objectives today, and this is what I'd like you to take away from this session. Number 1 is to be able to explain the typical quality measures for receivables and payables. Number 2, understand how daily lean management routines are used to identify quality problems. Number 3, learn how to use lean improvement practices to eliminate quality problems. And number 4, be able to explain the benefits of improving quality in receivables and payables. So let's get started. First, let's define the process. I know this webinar is about improving quality in receivables and payables, but from a lean viewpoint, we really want to look at the entire process. And the reason is because if you look at the entire process, and every process has an input, you transform information, and then there's an output. If it was a manufacturing process, you place an order, you deliver, create a product, produce a product, and then you ship the product. If it's a service business, you place an order, you deliver a service, there's output. So the same is true in payables and receivables. Payables is part of the procure to payment process, where the initial input is a purchase order from a customer or a check requisition from someone inside the company. Maybe, excuse me, there's an employee that wants expense reimbursement. So what happens in the process is that there's all these different activities. Forms are completed, there's approvals, there's reviews, there's system transactions to transform the initial information into an eventual cash disbursement. So as opposed to just thinking about payables, let's think about procure to pay. The mirror image of this is order to cash, where a customer places an order with a business. So you have all the transactions. The order is input. There's actually the actual operational transactions of creating and delivering the product and or service. You prepare the invoice and all the transactions which go along with that. And eventually, you get money for that order. Now, the great part about procure to pay and order to cash, when you look at them in terms of the entire process, is they're sort of like mirror images of each other. And most companies do both. So there's a lot of common problems in terms of quality issues, and there's a lot of common solutions, which we'll talk about as we go along. The other important part of looking at this from a process viewpoint is that this is not just about accounting people or the accounting department. Accounting just happens to be at the end of the process. But there are many other people inside an organization and outside the organization, customers and suppliers, who are involved in procure to pay and order to cash. So one of the benefits of looking at this from a process viewpoint is that the other people involved in the process that are not in the accounting function begin to learn more about how they really do impact an accounting process. And also in terms of problems and issues such as defects and improving quality. We want to make this a team effort, and we want to make this a process effort, not just individuals in the accounting department. So what is the waste we're looking at? Here's some typical waste. One is defects. And that is missing or incorrect information or data entry issues. Now the issue, or not the issue, the unique aspect of defects in these processes is that they create more waste. It's almost like exponential. That's why I have that waste to the third power. Every defect in terms of missing or incorrect information, data entry errors, typically creates some rework in terms of repeating a process step, maybe repeating many process steps. And then there's the waiting time. The waiting time to communicate between inside the process, the different people in the process, waiting for information so that we know how to correct this defect. And all of this work is non-value added. And so a defect in terms of information really has a multiplier effect on the amount of waste that it creates. So let's look at a typical way that defects are resolved. Accounting typically identifies the defect. Now, what's interesting about that is that accounting is at the end of the process. So that triggers a lot of work. So accounting will contact the supplier or the customer, or maybe they contact someone else inside the process. Then there's a lot of communication between those three groups of people, back and forth, whether it's emails and phone calls, exchanging information, all to try to figure out what went wrong. And so there's a lot of waiting time there. And when I talk about waiting time, is that the actual work is waiting to get done because we're trying to solve this problem. So eventually we get an answer. There's some rework in terms of a process step or a few process steps. And finally, we result in a cash receipt or a cash disbursement. And typically this is done incident by incident, meaning this process gets triggered every time there's a defect. One of the issues here is that this creates normalization of this resolution process, is that people think that this is very important work that has to be done. And while it is work that has to be done to correct the error, it's really all non-value added work. And it takes up a lot of time. It takes up time in accounting. It takes up time with customers and suppliers. And it also takes up time with the other people in the process. One quick example I worked at a company earlier this year, and one of my jobs was to help improve the accounting department. And really, from the first day there, I was told, well, accounting doesn't communicate. And a lot of that came from the purchasing department. And I actually sat down with each department separately. And it was really, really interesting. And they really didn't like each other. That's what's interesting. And when I talked to each department individually, they talked bad about the other department. Accounting talked bad about purchasing, purchasing talked bad about accounting. Not personally, but it's like, oh, they're too busy to help us. They don't get anything done, and they rush us to get answers. A typical conversation. And what was interesting is that the theme behind all this complaining was really about defect resolution. Accounting had a question and about a purchase order or about an invoice, and they went to purchasing and they said, "Oh, we need some help," but they didn't go personally. They sent an email, and then they waited for purchasing to respond. And purchasing wouldn't respond, so they'd send another email. Or finally, it got down to the deadline, and accounting would say, well, I need an answer right now. And then on the purchasing end, purchasing had questions about purchase orders or supplier payments, and what invoices were outstanding, and accounting would not respond in a timely manner to that. So the process of resolving problems created a lot of animosity in the organization. So this is a typical current state. There's another sort of current state that happens in accounting, is simply we're going to make a journal entry, and then we'll figure out everything later. We need to get our work, we in accounting, we need to get our work done. So I'm going to do the journal entry, and by golly, we'll deal with things later. So what are the characteristics of defect resolution in terms of a current state? If you think about the identification of the defect, it's done by accounting at the end of the process. Most procure to pay and order to cash processes have methods in place to try to detect the defects, but they don't always work. So accounting catches everything because they got to make sure that the numbers are right. The resolution process is 100% waste for the company, for the customer, and for the supplier. It's all non-value added work, and it takes up a lot of time, and it fixes specific problems, but it really doesn't always get at the root cause. And the current state of defect resolution reinforces stereotypes. Accounting, we are the police, because we're always asking people, why is this number wrong? Or we need this bit of information. And there's always this level, there's sometimes this level of urgency. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this idea that defects and problems and issues are normal. Here's another example. In terms of a poor current state, I was doing a work at a company, and they did invoicing based on percentage of completion of the work. And internally, the company would think that they completed a certain percentage of the work, and they'd send out an invoice to the customer, and the customer wouldn't pay on time. Eventually, when it got to the point of having to call the customer would say, well, no, the work wasn't completed. And then it created all this back and forth between the project manager, the people who were doing the work, and the project manager on the customer side. Did this work get done or not? And these were significant amounts of money, as you can imagine, on a percentage of completion contract method. And so the payment terms just went out, and it caused a lot of problems on both ends. So let's move on to the future state. The idea is to employ lean practices and methods with a goal of elimination of defects. Now, that's a different goal than the current state. The current state is we accept defects and we figure out how to fix them incident by incident. So one of the first aspects of employing any level of lean practice in any process is what's the goal? So we want a goal of elimination of defects. How are we going to do it? There are 3 steps. Number 1 is create performance measurements to reveal problems. Use daily management practices to understand problems, do root cause analysis, and actually resolve the problems in the short term, and use typical lean improvement activities to eliminate the problems. Now, this takes time. And what we want to do, is we want to reduce defects over time. The reason this takes time is because it's a learning process. People have to learn what are the problems and issues. They have to learn how to do root cause analysis. They have to learn how to create new methods to prevent the defects from happening. So learning takes time, and you're trying to do this in the course of operating a business. And, as a general comment, that's why lean takes time to take hold in a business, because of the learning aspect. And it's very, very important to realize that and not expect, I want to say, miracles to happen in a very short time. Some solutions, some ways to eliminate defects will be easy, and they can be put in place rather simply. Some may be more difficult, and it may take time to get them in place, and it may take trying a few things out to try to get the right solution in place. We want to use a team. So we want the team, not just the accounting department, but the process team, to work on this together. And if necessary, this is also can you bring in a customer or two or a supplier or two to get their input into possible defect issues that impact customers and suppliers. Accounting leads this effort. That is the key. Why? Because we're the ones who see the defects, but we're not the ones who are going to tell people what to do. We're not going to assume anything. We're going to use standard lean tools and methods to drive defects out of the business. So let's talk about each of these steps in a little more detail. We want 2 simple, easy measures. The reason we want simple, easy measures is because 1, we want to calculate them frequently. Number 2, we want them to drive learning and problem solving and learning. And so people need to be able to understand what they mean. If you create complex measures, people don't understand those. So borrowing a page from manufacturing, we want to understand the defect rate. What is the ratio of defective items over total items processed? So this would be an item would be an accounts payable invoice or an accounts receivable invoice. Then the question is, how many defects do you have? We will explain defects here in a minute or two. The other aspect is the other measure is late payment percentage. Typically, a customer will pay late if something's wrong because they don't want to pay it till it gets resolved. If you're dispersing cash in accounts payable, you're not going to pay an invoice until everything is all tidy and fixed. So also measure late payment percentage, because that's a good indicator of things that are going on between you and your customer or you and your suppliers. So 2 simple measures. defect rate, late payment percentage. The purpose of the measures is to reveal defects. Okay, sorry, I went too fast. We want to reveal the defects. We may know intuitively that we have problems. We want to put numbers to it, because when you put numbers to a problem, it gives it helps people understand the magnitude of the problem. Because you could always say, well, we have defects. What's our defect rate? Is it good? Is it bad? So here are the typical defects that occur in receivables or payables. First is incorrect or missing terms. Typically, this revolves around price, quantity, dates, or maybe payment terms. And what I mean by payment terms, it might be something specific like percentage complete. So if you think about some things, like in procure to pay, what are some of the problems? Well, accounting gets an invoice, and the price on the invoice is different than the price on the purchase order. Or the quantity on the invoice is different than the quantity that was received. Dates might be off a little bit. So all this creates a problem. Sometimes we have the incorrect product delivered or service performed. Maybe it was delivered or not. Sorry, incorrect product or service. So maybe the wrong product was shipped. Maybe a mistake was made. The service was not correct. And sometimes it's not the actual product or service, but maybe there was a key punch error. And so what shows up on the invoice is different than what actually happened, because those mistakes sometimes happen. Another type of defect is transaction timing. This typically occurs between customers and suppliers in terms of the application of credits, the application of discounts, the application of payments and refunds and RMAs, all of this timing thing where you get a customer that pays you. Let's say the invoice was for $1,000, and they pay you $950. The reason is they're taking a credit against that invoice that maybe you applied the credit in a different way. So you run into all those transaction timing problems also, which ends up creating a whole lot of rework. Another example is missing approvals. Maybe that's internal approvals, things people don't sign on the purchase order. Between customers and suppliers, maybe there's some missing documentation. We don't have this one document we need, it's missing, and so that holds up something. And finally, there's the attention getting methods where you withhold a payment or you put a customer on credit hold, where we're gonna stop the process because we want to get the attention of the customer or the supplier about another problem that maybe they haven't resolved or maybe they're ignoring. So you get a lot of this also that goes on. And that's sort of that example of the percentage complete, where we're not going to pay the invoice till we agree on what percentage of complete is. So those are what we want to start looking at. And what we want to do is we want to learn what's the frequency of these errors, which ones occur more than others. And we find that out in the daily management process. Now, why do we do something daily? Well, in typically procure to pay and order to cash are what we would consider high volume transaction processes. They're always working, and they go on a daily basis. So if you look at defects on a daily basis, and you work at defects on a daily basis, that makes it a whole lot easier because there's fewer items. It's easier to understand root causes, and it's easier to fix. If you batch and look at them on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, then all of a sudden you have a high volume of transactions to get through, and you don't have enough time to get through them because deadlines are occurring. So there's really 5 steps in the daily management process. Number 1 is make the defects visual. Create a status board of defects. Conduct a daily team huddle in terms of how the process is working, what the defects are, and what are we doing about them. Begin daily root cause analysis. And the last 2 are about having standard work to fix the problems that occur as they occur. And this can be done either, it's done in the business, it's done in the process. Maybe you create a separate flow to fix problems. But what you want to do is once we identify a problem, how do we fix it, and what's the standard time frame to fix it? Now, again, this is standard lean work. And what you may run into here is people might say, well, we're too busy to do this. And in fact, that just occurred in a company I'm doing some work in, not related to payables or receivables, but another process. And you must remember that if people are in a process are busy, they might be busy doing the wasteful activities. So you have to explain to them the benefits of a daily management process where we are identifying errors and actively working on reducing the errors. That will create more time. If there's a backlog of quality problems, put them in the process. It's really, really important to just start the daily work because this is a learning process. So the faster you put the measure, so if you get the measures in place and you do the daily management, you will have people then starting to learn what we're trying to accomplish here. So let's look at these steps in more detail. A visual status board is quite simple. This is a typical layout that you might see, for example, in a production area in a factory. So what are the defects? Okay, and let's visually post all the defects that occur when they occur. Which ones are being worked on, which ones are in process, which ones are completed. And we want this to be an active board, meaning we move the defect along as the work gets done. One simple way to do this is on Post-it notes. You don't have to create anything very elaborate. Problems and issues. You want to also make any problem or issue related to resolving the defect visible. You also want to show the trends. So what's the defect rate? And then what are the root causes, the primary root causes? What's the percentage of late payment? And what are the root causes? You can show the numbers. You can show a graph showing the trend over the last few months. And then you also want standard work. And the standard work is who does what by when to resolve these defects. What the board does is it increases awareness. It's a essential first step because when the work is visible, then everybody pays attention to it. We want to avoid things like emails or phone calls. We want to make the work visible and communicate around the board. The visibility also will then drive dedication to first resolving the defects in a short period of time and creating permanent solutions. So we create a board, and then we have a daily huddle. So this idea is we have a team-based meeting around the board, maybe 10, maximum 15 minutes a day, and it's at a set time, beginning of the day, middle of the day, and at the end of the day. It doesn't really matter, but it's at a standard time. And what we're going to do is we're going to review the new defects that occurred. We're going to try to do very simple root cause analysis, and then assign responsibility. Who's going to work on resolving this defect? We'll also look at what defects are still in process that maybe didn't get resolved in the standard time frame. We'll also update the measures and look at the trends. It's important to do the daily huddle because of the communication and discussion. Remember, this is a learning process, and problems get solved by people thinking and talking and helping each other out. So you can't do that sitting at a desk and sending an email. This is about using brain power and learning about things together. So whoever is on the defect team, for lack of a better term, they're required to attend. And attending this huddle is a priority. You don't miss it because you got something else to do. And what this will do, the daily huddle will reinforce the standard work of improving quality. We want this board to be active, so we post defects as they occur. We move each defect through the process in as much as possible in real time. And we update the measures and the root causes during the huddle. So here's some takeaways and pointers about the daily management and the huddle. First is people may be reluctant to talk at the beginning. I set this up once at a company, and people wouldn't talk about root cause analysis of problems and issues. They were very, very quiet. Why this occurs? Because it becomes very personal. I personally may have done something, or maybe I've made a key punch error, whatever it may be. So we need to make the huddle and the daily management a very safe place where people can talk openly and honestly and factually about what's happening. Nobody's going to point any fingers. Nobody's going to blame anybody. It's about the process, not the people. To get this started and make it work effectively, you probably want some coaching or mentoring, meaning someone who has experience in daily management and huddles and visual boards might attend the meeting. They won't necessarily lead the meeting, or maybe they would lead it for a little while, but they need to observe to make sure that people are following the work of the standard agenda items and they're talking about problems and issues. Because if you don't, because they're learning how to do this. And so much like a teacher and students, you want the teacher to watch to make sure that the students are learning the right way. If you get down the path too far of them running the huddles their own way, they begin to think that, well, that's correct. So it's like a teacher, if you continually do something wrong in terms of like your math class and you don't get corrected, you don't know you're making a mistake. So that's important there. What I found over the years is that in administrative processes, people will learn to like the boards and the huddles and the entire process, because it actually saves time, because all these issues and problems that you used to talk about a different way get talked about in a very short period of time. And because because I did this once in a customer support department that sort of resisted at the beginning, but after about doing it for 3 or 4 weeks, they loved it. So again, you put the work in, put the huddle in, and stick to it. So the third piece is the improvement process. Now, I want to give you a little caveat here. I really can't be specific about, well, improve this or improve that, and here's how you do it. The reason is what you fix and what you improve depends on the root cause, and every company and every process is going to have some different root causes. So the important takeaway here is to follow standard improvement practices and you will achieve the results you want. So the first thing you want to do, and this comes out of the daily meeting, is identify the high frequency root cause or causes. You go after these problems first because the return on time, the effort that you have to put in will be the return you get from the effort will be great. Meaning you might have to spend 3 or 4 days trying to resolve a problem, but you might free up 10% time for everybody. So and that's a permanent increase in time. You might have to map specific activities. Like, for example, I'm working with a company on their quote process right now. So one of the things is we had to map the quote process to really understand the problems and issues in terms of getting quality information. If you don't map the process, then people sometimes have a tendency to disagree on what happens when. So mapping the process brings everyone together and focuses people on, yes, this is how it works. This is where the problems occur. For defects, you want to, and this really comes from the mapping process, you want to identify the initial input locations. So where does the information initially come into the process? Because that's a key point in where to look for solutions. Then what you do is you either implement a known lean solution or you experiment. Sometimes it's really, really easy for the solution. Just put it in place. But if the solution is not apparent and maybe you're not sure which way to go, run some experiments and try some things out and measure and see, well, if we make these changes, does that reduce our defects? Yes or no? And the measure will tell you if it's a good solution or not. One example from this quote process that I mentioned a minute ago is it was very apparent when we mapped the process and we looked at sort of the activities behind the process that the customer support people had to jump many times in preparing a quote between two different systems. So they had to look information up in one system and then put it in another system. And in the quoting system, they already had mapped some of the information from the other system. So the idea of let's map a little more information in so they don't have to jump between systems. It was a 10-minute, it took about 15 minutes to map this information. But what it did is it saved 5 to 6 minutes a quote. And when you did the math, it was like hundreds of hours a year. It's close to 1,000 hours a year of saved time. Follow the standard work for Kaizen or improvement. Not every activity is going to be a formal Kaizen event that's going to take days to solve, might take hours to solve, but follow the process of the standard work. Because if you follow the standard work, you get permanent solutions. If you sort of do random improvements, the tendency is you get more band-aids and then the problems reappear. So that's the general improvement process, and you should follow the principles of Jidoka to determine what solutions, what improvements are good. The idea of Jidoka is to stop and fix. Another definition of it is to mistake-proof the process. Another way that I look at it is quality at the source. So quality at the source means we want to detect the abnormality. We want to detect the defect at the input of the defect, as close to the input as possible. At that point, we want to stop and fix immediately. We want this process to be self-monitoring. And then we also want a very short feedback loop. So detecting the abnormality at input, what are some solutions that can be used? There's some technical solutions maybe that can be used. For example, if you're talking about using any kind of software, there's required fields that need to be input. You could do autofill. You can have restrictions on terms with drop down, meaning you can only choose certain types of information to input. Think about when you order things on the internet and how internet ordering, it's hard to make a mistake. And maybe there's questions about, are you sure about this? So you want to try to think of solutions like that. The self-monitoring is very important, meaning if I'm performing a certain function, if I'm inputting some information, I can detect the quality problem myself. Traditionally, how do we do it? Well, we do that with reviews and approvals, but the fact of the matter is reviews and approvals don't work very well because things still escape. So using these 4 principles, when you're looking at an improvement or looking at alternatives, do they achieve one or more of these objectives? If so, it's probably a good improvement to make. And what's important to remember is any improvement is a good improvement as long as it is reducing the defect rate or the late payment percentage. We're not looking for one improvement that solves all the problems, because that doesn't exist. So as you go through the root cause analysis and you do your Pareto chart, work on things. Work on some hard ones, work on some easy ones. But keep the process of improvement going on, and eventually that rate goes down. Remember, it takes time to learn. So a lot of times you deal with the simple problems early to teach people about how to do improvement before you tackle the big problems. And so follow the principles, and it is part of daily work. So let's wrap things up here. We had four learning objectives: understanding the quality measures, how to use lean management routines, how to use lean improvement, and be able to explain the benefits. So let's review these learning objectives. Quality measures. We have 2 simple, easy quality measures. They're used to drive learning, drive behavior, drive actions. The goal is to decrease these rates over time. Doesn't matter where they start out. All that matters is they get better. I'm working with the company that's doing where I'm helping them with their quote process. We calculated the lead time for quotes. Now, they had set a standard of 2 hours to respond to any quote. Well, they never really measured what the actual time was, but when we started looking at the actual time and actually calculating it, it's between 3 and 4 hours. And that was really eye-opening to the team because they thought they were getting it under 2 hours. Now, what happened? Well, yes, when I pick up a quote to work on, I can get it done rather quickly. The problem is, when did the quote come in, and what else was going on that prevented me from working on that quote, or incomplete information going back to the customer, I need more information to complete this quote. So the measure provides facts, and it becomes a common denominator. It focuses people. The daily management process, it's about learning. We do it daily because it's easier to learn on a daily basis, easier to understand root causes. We also want quick resolution of defects to occur, eliminate all that waiting time until we can eliminate the root cause. And we also want to incorporate understanding defects and problem solving in our daily work routines. So that's why we have a daily management process. Improving quality using Jidoka. We have a goal, quality at the source. Oops. We want our improvements to drive us towards that goal. We don't want random improvements. We want to try to spend our time on improvements that get us a little closer to the goal. And finally, the benefits of improving quality in receivables and payables. This is always very important to understand. The first is creating capacity. Whenever you eliminate waste in any business process, you create capacity. This is more time. And this is the primary benefit of improving quality in payables and receivables. You create capacity in the entire process, not just the accounting department, but the entire procure to pay or order to cash process. And you also will increase capacity for your customers and suppliers. That leads to improved relationships. The entire process, all the people that work in the process feel better. That story I told earlier about accounting and purchasing not liking each other, well, that goes away. Your relationships with your customers and your suppliers gets better. Financial impact. Everybody likes to be able to quantify improvements in terms of money. Well, there might be some direct cost savings, such as reducing expediting charges or return charges. If you want to calculate direct cost savings, try to find exactly how much you'll be saving in terms of looking at invoices. And then if you want to use some trend analysis, because there's some savings out there. When it comes to labor, and from a lean viewpoint, labor is a fixed cost, meaning it doesn't vary with volume. The people in your process are going to still be working for you, whether they're working on defects in the old way or the new way. You're still going to have the same people in the process. However, they're going to become more productive. And the creation of that time allows them to get other work done and really avoid hiring people. So what happens is your labor percentage, your labor cost as a percentage of sales decreases over time. I don't recommend trying to say you're saving labor, because you're not really saving labor. Focus on the direct costs. So that wraps things up for the webinar. We have some time for questions, which give me a chance to open the question panel. If you want to learn more about lean accounting, that's our website. If you'd like to ask me any questions, that's my email. Any questions about today's webinar or these topics in general, be glad to help you. We also have a LinkedIn group, the Lean Accounting Group. Please join and join the discussion. So I'm going to look through the questions, and actually I don't have any questions at this point. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, well, I'll let you guys go early. Thanks for attending the webinar. You'll get an email about the recording tomorrow. And stay tuned. We'll be doing another webinar sometime before Christmas. I'll be sending an announcement out early. If you would like to opt in to our mailing list, you can go to our website, and on the home page, there's a way you can opt in to get on our mailing list. Thank you very much, and have a good Thanksgiving weekend. Bye-bye.